Okay.
Yeah, cool. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Mindset series. I'm your host, Eidos Ibadine, and I am joined here by the mental performance coach, Stephen Baker. And Stephen specializes in mindset coaching, specifically for professional poker players. So, Stephen, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the talk.
Hey, good to see you, Dose.
Yes, thank you so much. Like I said, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for being willing to hop in this podcast with me. And I just have a couple questions. So first off, what got you into the mindset coaching field? Like what got you in it? What piqued your interest? All that jazz. You can give all the background you want.
Okay, right. Well, it goes back a long way. The start of my career, I was a lawyer, um, and I did a lot of courtroom work. And only really now reflecting on it, or only in the years that passed, did I reflect on it and realize that there was significant variations in my performance. There were days where I was definitely on my A game and days where it wasn't. It was maybe B or C. Hopefully, it never fell below C. There was a level of professionalism there, but equally, there is a difference, right, in performance between being at your best and being okay. And that can have an impact. Um, so looking back, that was significant. And it was only really in the years that followed that I started to truly reflect and ask questions about why that was the case. I, from being primarily a courtroom lawyer, I became what in England is known as a solicitor, which is more you prepare the cases rather than appear in court. But it was my own business. There was lots of pressures associated with that. Results were still important. I was still a litigator. And again, in the years that followed, I came to reflect on, was I my best? Was I making the best decisions? I was also involved in cases involving psychological injuries. Um, and that really brought about an interest in psychology. I mean, to be in that field as a lawyer, you pretty well have to understand it just the way the doctors do, because you have to be able to cross-examine them and prepare questions for them. So I became really interested in psychology. I got to the point where I wanted a new challenge, and I think to a lot of people's surprise, I changed from the law to professional poker, and I became a professional poker player. And it was really about a year into that I became really interested in this field, because it's a job which challenges your mindset pretty well like no other, because you can do the right things and still get the wrong results.
Yeah.
And vice versa for what it's worth. But predominantly, it's a game of skill. And over the long run, it is a game of skill, but there is an element of short term luck involved. And that kind of messes with the brain. And it was about a year in that I started working with somebody who's now my business partner, but was then my performance coach. And he's also my mentor, Elliot Rowe, who's extremely well known in the field. And he used a variety of techniques with me, but it was hypnotherapy that made the difference. And if you'd have asked me a few years prior to that, would hypnotherapy alter my mindset? I'd have firstly thought, well, do I really need my mindset altering? Number one. And number two, would it make a difference? And the answer was yes and yes. And there's a lot of evidence out there about the impact of hypnotherapy, and the science is there. It's just not really accepted so much into the medical mainstream. But there's a guy called Dr. David Spiegel at Stanford University. He sort of oversaw a big study into this and showed that hypnotherapy made a huge impact on people's mental states, patterns of thinking. So anyway, that made a big difference to me within poker. It actually made me make decisions better, made me less stressful when I was playing, perform under pressure better, and also just reduced the level of stress and anxiety in my general life. It sort of started to have a bigger impact. And I got to the point in poker where I was coaching, and I discovered I really loved coaching. And I started to reflect back and thought, I'm really interested in this whole psychology. I'm also love working with people. And as a poker player, it's a fairly lonely career. Um, Most of the time you're there on your own. Um, and I look back on my legal career, and even when I got to the point where I was frankly becoming a little bit jaded with it, the thing I enjoyed and the thing I got really positive feedback from everybody I'd worked with was, you really mentor people and coach people well as to how to think about the law, how to handle cases, how to handle yourself better. So I really, all the stars aligned, and I spoke to Elliot about it, and he said, "I'll mentor you," and it was like, okay, this is a no-brainer for me, because I knew the impact he'd had on not just me but a lot of people. And so I I went all in with Elliot, and I'm now coaching, and I love it. And I coach. You mentioned professional poker players, but I deal with people across a whole range of disciplines. I've got professional athletes, I've got traders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, anybody really who has to perform in a competitive or high pressure environment and has to make good decisions, often under pressure. That's effectively what I do.
That is so awesome. I mean, even just your story from going into law, then doing professional poker, and then now coaching, not even just professional poker players, but just high performers in general. And so I guess, is there like a similarity between some of the clients that you have? Like, say you have a professional athlete and a successful entrepreneur. Do you see some similarities there when you're coaching them? Like, do you notice like, all right, this person might need this type of thing, or this person is lacking here? Like, are there any similarities in between some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the issues are almost always similar. They might manifest themselves in a different context, but they're similar. Confidence. Can you maintain confidence? How do you cope with pressure? How do you cope with anxiety, performance anxiety?
Mhm.
That happens, if you're a professional athlete, you'll know, there can be nerves at the beginning of an event or before an event. How do you handle that? How do you make sure you don't choke? But it's the same for a businessman. You may go into a meeting or you have to present at in front of an audience. You may have to go into a difficult negotiation. All those issues, confidence, anxiety, performing under pressure, thinking clearly under pressure, not freezing, they all apply. And they apply to the professional poker player, the professional athlete, the entrepreneur, the CEO. Any of these fields has those same pressures, and the mindset issues, and usually the causes of those issues is very, very similar. And effectively, a lot of the techniques are transferable. So yeah, that there really the issue of mindset and performance foundations applies right across the piece, whether you're, it primarily, as it were, in theory, using your body to make a professional living, or whether you're using your mind. The truth of the matter is your mind is always involved in everything.
Yeah, for sure. And there's one thing that you mentioned, you talked about transferable, and I 100% agree with that. I do believe that not only skills are transferable, but like the mental is transferable as well. Like me being a professional athlete, there's some things that I've learned about myself in my own mental game that I've been able to see in other areas of my life where it's like, okay, if I'm anxious about this thing here, I know how to handle that
Yeah.
because of the mental work that I've done, on the track, on the start line. Like I remember one time I was in grad school and we had a group presentation and my classmates were extremely nervous. They were just like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so nervous. I don't know what to do." Me, I was cool as can be. I was just like, "All right, I'm not nervous." I've been in a situation like this before where like I've been in harder situations. Like I've nothing makes me more nervous than being on the start line. So I know if I can handle the nerves on being on the start line, I can handle the nerves of almost anything else in my life, whether it's a presentation, a hard negotiation, a hard conversation. I know I can handle it all just because of the mental skills that I've built, being an athlete myself. And so then my next question for you is, have you personally yourself dealt with performance anxiety, like when you were a poker player, even when you were a lawyer, and then even now as a coach? Like, have you dealt with performance anxiety, and how do you deal with it if you have dealt with it?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I dealt with it as a lawyer. I dealt with it. I dealt with it in professional poker, and I wish I'd had the answer is I wish I'd had the coaching I later had and now give myself back in the day. The truth of the matter was, I didn't really reflect on it enough when I was earlier in my career. Look, the truth is, if you're getting through and you're doing okay, it's very easy to sort of say, well, hey, look, this is all right, and maybe some days are good and some days are bad. But do we want to be the best we can be? You know, do we want to say, well, some days it's my A game, some days it's my B game, some days it's my C game? The truth of the matter is, we can hit that A game a lot more if we actually understand what's going on, and actually harness various techniques to perform under pressure, create the right foundations. Because the truth of the matter is, there's not a limitless pill you can take on any one day which flicks the switch, or you know, or even just flicks the switch for all time, or even on that specific day. I can definitely, and would now use techniques myself, um, to actually reduce performance anxiety on the day, but it's overlain over a really good, consistent pattern of foundations. And the truth of the matter is, yeah, I suffered those, but I can say that they are definitely controllable phenomenon if you know the right techniques. And as I say, performance coaching back then wasn't a thing. I mean, we're talking quite a few years now when I started out as a lawyer. And really, even when I became a professional poker player, it was still relatively new ground, the whole mindset and performance field, certainly within poker. I mean, you watch a series like Billions now, and I don't know whether you've ever seen it, but there's like a coach, there's a mindset coach is one of the main characters. And somebody mentioned that to me the other day. And it's sort of almost now starting to fall into the mainstream a little more.
Mhm.
But as I say, it's something I wish I'd had. And certainly some of the techniques and the ways of approaching performance, stress and anxiety would have been hugely powerful, would have made a big difference on certain occasions for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do think it's something I wish I knew way back when. Like sometimes I feel like I started a little bit late. Not late in terms of coaching, but just late in terms of like learning this information in my career. This I wish I knew this information when I was like in high school and even in college. I think college especially because there were some times where I would have a bad performance and I would really beat myself up about it. But I feel like if I had the mental tools back then that I have now, I was always able to bounce back from bad races pretty well, but I think I would have bounced back a lot quicker, even better if I had the tools and techniques that I have now. And I think when it comes to, um, like you mentioned something about like having your A game and having your A game more often than your B game and your C game. And I think one thing that you mentioned was that like, yeah, you're not going to be 100% every single day, but having the right mental skills can help you be on your A game more often than not. Because I remember I read in a book called Four Agreements and it talked about doing your best, and sometimes your best might look different each day. But I think when you have the right mental skills, you'll perform more consistently at a higher level. And I think I guess that's the line we're trying to get to. Like we want to perform high, but then also be consistent at that high performance because it's easy, not I'm gonna say easy, but it's easier to perform high one time and then be inconsistent for the rest versus being really consistent throughout. And that's something I see in a lot of track athletes myself, or just athletes in general. They'll have a really good performance and then it's just dang, what happened the next two performances or three performances?
Absolutely.
And then you see how like there's some people they're super talented, they have all the ability in the world, but for some reason they're mental, they just crumble under pressure. And then there's some people even they'll have an off day, but their off day is like a really off day versus some people, their off day is like, oh, okay. Like kind of what you mentioned how like if I'm at my A game, my off day for me might be a B game. Where some people, their off day is like a D game, and you're like, what's going on here? Like some people perform bad, it's like really bad. And the other people, when it's bad, it's like it's not your best, but it's not that bad in comparison.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. No, no. I mean, this is absolutely it. You know, and I think, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't even really think too much about how I could manipulate consistent performance at that stage. But what I did do was definitely, if I had a good day, this is going back to my legal career now. So I'm in my 20s. Or certainly, you know, the early part where I'm appearing in court a lot, whereas the latter part I was more in the boardroom kind of guy running cases from a distance. But in that early stage, if I had a good performance, I got a bit of a high from it, definitely. But if I had one which I was disappointed with, it was a big low, and I would be down, down, down on myself. And actually, that's a skill as well. It's not just getting to your A game more often, which is definitely achievable in whatever field you're at, but it's also accepting and forgiving yourself when you do have a B game or C game day.
Mhm.
Sometimes, you know, as long as you stuck to the process, and even by the way, if you fall off the wagon a little in terms of the process, you've got to just forgive yourself at some point and just get back again. That's the thing. It's how you get back off the floor. But definitely that was a skill. It took me a long time to learn that, like, you know, you're not going to be perfect all the time.
Mhm.
Not every day is going to be that A game. And some days, even when it's an A game, you're going to lose.
Mhm.
And that's okay. You've got to have the mental resilience to deal with that, to come back and compete again and again and again. And it's very difficult if you cannot do that. But it's definitely the case that I think probably a part of me at that stage knew I can be better, but I wasn't really thinking enough about how I could be better. And it's only in the years that followed that I started to put the pieces together and say, you know, wait a minute, there is a way of doing it. And then you go off and do some study,
Mhm.
really step back, look at things like the impact. I've already mentioned the impact of the work I did with Elliot. I qualified in flow state psychology with the Flow Genome Project, and they work with some, you know, Olympic athletes and Google and the US Navy SEALs, the United Nations, lots of high performers about how you can achieve that really high performance state again and again and again. And then you start to put together a more coherent structure in your mind as to what it is that helps you perform at a high level much more consistently.
Yeah, so there was a lot that you mentioned, but one thing that I really wanted to touch on was where you said when you have low moments, you're like really, really low. And I used to be the same way. I remember when didn't perform well, it felt like the end of the world, and it felt like I suck, like I'm not good anymore. And I just used to, I don't know, it was so bad. Like I used to base my whole season off of like one bad performance, and I'm like, what was I doing? Like just because had one bad race, that doesn't make me a bad runner, or just because you had a bad case doesn't make you a bad lawyer, or just because you had a bad poker match doesn't mean you're a bad poker player. And I think is coming to that realization like, okay, separating a bad moment from the whole personhood. Because a lot of times some people they'll fail at one thing and it's like, oh, I'm a failure. And it's like, no, you just failed at this one thing on this day. That doesn't mean you failed completely. And I think it's some we need to oftentimes look back on the progress that we have made, right? There's times where like if you look back, you're like, okay, more than likely you probably had better performances than you did bad performances. And like you said, it's all about being able to get back up on the wagon and get back up on your feet. Because at the end of the day, you're gonna fail. Failure is inevitable. We're all gonna fail at some
Yeah.
point. And you have to be able to, keep bouncing back. The most successful people isn't the people who succeeded the most, is because they didn't give up. They were the most gritty. They had the most determination. They kept going. Yeah, they might have pivoted and changed some things around, but they still kept pressing on and kept pushing on. And two, I think also um, self-talk is important. I know for me, anytime I have like a bad performance, I would just tell myself I'm still great. Like regardless of whether or not the performance was really bad, I know in my heart of hearts was like, okay, I'm still a great runner at the end of the day. And I have one of my teammates to thank for that because he used to tell me that all the time back in college. I have a bad race, and he's like, "You still great." And like that really stuck with me. It was like now I tell people that too, like you still great, like regardless of how bad your performance was. Like there was a time in my season where this past season I had one of this I probably had the worst race of my professional career ever. And granted, the terrain was terrible, weather was bad, all that stuff was really windy. It was horrible. But I told myself, you know what? I'm still great. There's still season left. And then legit, my following race, I had one of the best races of my career. So it's like just being able to bounce back from that quickly and just having that self-talk. And then another thing too is one thing it's a philosophy I kind of came up with myself was being your biggest fan, being your biggest cheerleader. Because there's a lot of times where, say, you have an NBA player you look at or a sports person, you see some of those fans, man, they're gonna ride or die for that person. And like LeBron James, for example, he can have a terrible game. There's gonna be people who still believe that he had a good game just because they're such big fans of him. And so I say all that to say that it's important that we become fans of ourselves because we can then, all right, yeah, I might have had a bad game, but when you're a fan of somebody, you're not gonna talk to them any kind of way. You're gonna really like respect them, respect yourself, and all that jazz. You're gonna encourage them. Like people encourage their fans. I mean, fans of people encourage their like supporters all the time. And so it's the same that we have to encourage ourselves when, bad things do happen and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, one thing I think a lot of us who are, on a sort of ambitious, hard charging driven program is we don't congratulate ourselves enough. I think it's really important congratulating yourself on your wins. And the wins don't have to be wins in the sense of putting a medal literally around your neck or something like that. The wins are sometimes just staging posts in other people's minds, but it's a good training session. It's
Mhm.
putting in a good day's work, ticking off the boxes of those problems you had to solve that day. It's really important that as well, that when we do have a bad day, sure, we learn a lesson. But if some days, this is true of a lot of pursuits, you can do everything right and still get the wrong result. This is very true of professional poker. It is a game of probabilities. It's a game of skill, but there is an element of luck in the short term. And
Mhm.
you can do things right and get a short-term bad result. And it's very easy to come away and start telling yourself that all sorts of stories about I'm not good, I didn't play well, I won't do that again. That may be something technical, which actually was the right move. And a lot of the work I do is making sure people stick to a process, because if the process is correct, you stick to it. So that's really important. The worst thing I think you can do, and it took me a while to realize this, is get down on yourself, as if getting down on yourself, beating yourself up was in itself a way of getting better. It's not. It's all it is beating yourself up. What you need to do is say, okay, wait a minute, that didn't go as to plan. Let's review what my plan was. Let's review how I executed. Let's see if I can take something concrete away, which I can change next time. Just getting out a sort of, a whip and beating yourself with it is not is not going to do anything. It's just going to make you feel bad. So there's definitely times where you have to reflect, but equally, by the way, sometimes you can get a good result and go the other way and think, you're untouchable. And the important thing is to just say, okay, where's the next step? Or were the things I did wrong, which actually meant on the day I was a bit lucky, and maybe I need to just think about that the next time. So there should always be that honest self-scrutiny, but it should be balanced. It shouldn't be just trying to almost punish yourself for poor outcomes. And I think a lot of people have that program. And I'm going to be honest with you, I had that program for a long time myself. And it's interesting, there's often quite a story about where that comes from. It often goes right back to our childhoods, various experiences, but it's really important. Yeah, so you've got to be your own biggest fan for sure, but you want to be also a wise fan who actually gives some good advice, which maybe the kind of fans you're talking about might not give to LeBron James. They'll just tell him he's great. Nobody, of course, no fan's going to go up to LeBron James and says, I think you maybe need to think about this next time you're out there on the court. But a wise mentor would say, hey, it went well today, but I saw this in your game, and maybe next time you need to think about that because somebody else might exploit it, and it might not work every time.
Now, that's a good point. That's honestly something that I've kind of struggled with in my own track career, where I find a racing style that works and I try to do that over and over and over again. But one thing that's helped me is realizing that one, every single race is different. And so, yeah, it might have worked in this race, but what I'm gonna do might not necessarily work in that race. And just knowing that, it allows me to, number one, be adaptable. I think a lot of times when I found something that worked, I just stick with it and try to be rigid with it. I didn't want to try to do anything different. Like, you know what, this worked for me here, so let me just try to keep mimicking this thing so I can, try to get the performances that I need. But that doesn't always work. And then other times it's like, all right, let me try to regroup and refocus. And I really like what you said about, even when things do go well, um still take time to actually reevaluate and reassess. All right, what could I have done better? Because there's always room for improvement. And then also, I like how you talked about how you can do all the right things and still fail. And I think
Yeah,
that's another one it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the truth. You can make all the right moves and still lose. And you have
yeah.
to be okay with that. We can walk away thinking, all right, I know I did everything right. And today just wasn't my day. And that's okay. And I know for sure that the next time comes, I'm gonna do my best to make all the right moves again. And hopefully, you know, I win, but if not, it's still okay. And that just shows that we don't have control over the outcome. We can't control what our opponents do. We can make all the right moves, but our opponent that day or the people that we're going up against might have just made better moves. And then another
Exactly.
thing you said too was beating ourselves up, right? I think, like you said, it can go back to childhood. And sometimes it can even go back to coaches too. A lot of coaches tend to be very hard on their athletes, where it's like, you need to do this. And what the hell was that? And they just start cursing their athletes out. And then even sometimes too, there are times where, like, say you have a bad performance. I remember at high school, we had a bad race, like all of us collectively, and we on the bus ride back to the school, our coach is pissed that like nobody was upset. And I'm like, how upset are we supposed to be? And so then I kind of internalized that. And now I'm thinking I have to be super pouty and pissed off every time I have a bad race. And that's not sometimes that's like, yeah, I can be upset, but I'm not gonna let that ruin my entire day. And so then to segue into my next question is, what's the best piece of advice that a coach has ever given you?
Honestly, it's I think it sounds really boring and almost prosaic and obvious, but it is about being consistent and trusting the process. Now, whatever we're talking about in terms of consistency and process, it's almost always letting time be your ally. Just keep at it. So, in terms of fitness, I mean, a lot of the clients I work with, the foundations I will give to them all before we start getting into the mindset work very specifically and using techniques such as flow states, such as hypnotherapy. I always check that their sleep is right. And I'm not just talking about professional athletes here, I'm talking about everybody. Sleep, nutrition, exercise. Those three things have to be right, but you cannot just get them right in a day or a week. For it to really translate into high performance, it needs to be consistent. And it's the same with the mindset work. Some people, when people come to me, I'll always do a initial chat with them before I take them on as a client. And it's a two-way process. It's not just them assessing whether they want me, I'll assess whether I want them. And one of the things I'm looking for is somebody who has an understanding that this kind of work, including the hypnotherapy, which can be absolutely amazing in terms of shifting performance and mindset and the way you respond under pressure, it is amazing, but you have to understand that it is like coming to a personal trainer. If you come to a personal trainer and you're not fit, and the trainer says, right, I can get you fit. If you say, oh, can you do it in a week? It's just not realistic, you know. And or even if it's like, okay, 3 months, yeah, I can get you fit in 3 months, but guess what will happen after 3 months? You will just go back. And I think a lot of people are looking for magic pills in performance, and the truth of the matter is consistency is king. And it's trusting the process. There's a phrase, I think the US Navy SEALs use it: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It is this idea of just building step by step, building your processes, building on your training in whatever way, and eventually it will bring the results. And I think, you know, it's very easy to hop from one thing to another, looking for the magic solution. And, you know, again, I'm a coach now. I've had enough time to observe everything, other people, studies, but also honestly my own performance. And I definitely, for a while in poker, where I was desperate to succeed and succeed quickly, I was hopping from one idea to the other, and I'd changed my daily schedule and I changed all of the hacks I'd use to try and get better. So I was doing good things, but I was not necessarily being as consistent with any one of those things as I needed to be to actually really get the benefit. So yeah, the idea of consistency is really, really important. And it sounds so obvious, but most people don't do it. Most people, you know, are either too ill-disciplined in the sense that they just cannot find the basic willpower to keep doing that thing. And there are ways to overcome and address that for sure. But the other interesting one is the reason people are inconsistent is they're so desperate to get to the promised land that they don't stick with the program and they try and shortcut it. And the best metaphor I can give people is, hey, if you were stood at the beginning of a marathon, which strategy would you use? Would you pace yourself to get to the end? Or would you say, I want to get to the end fast, so I'm going to start by sprinting? Because guess which one's going to work best? You know, you've got to accept that in pretty well all the pursuits I work with, you are in a long-term game. You may have short-term immediate competitions, pressure points, but you are in a long-term game. You have to basically be consistent in all of your approaches towards performance to actually get a good result. And honestly, if I could give a pill, I've talked about giving a limitless pill, but if I could give a pill to everybody I worked with to do one thing, it would be to be consistent in whatever that thing is, because that's the game changer.
Wow, you touched on a lot. And the first thing I want to say is I think consistency is one of those things that everybody can do. I do at the same time think it's a talent as well. And what I mean by that is consistency definitely comes easier to a lot of other people, to some people than other people. I think of myself for an example, and I wouldn't necessarily look at myself as the most naturally gifted, talented track athlete, but one thing I can say that a gift that I do have is consistency. Even just my ability to be able to show up day in and day out and just get the work done. And then two, my performances match that. Like there's been seasons where I've run the same times consistently for the whole season, or just floated around the same times, and just having that skill of consistency can definitely breed breakthrough. And then two, you talked about trusting the process, and this is a phrase that I love a lot. Just learning how to trust the process. And I've realized that when you're able to trust and love the process, you don't really have to worry about failing because number one, there's many people who don't trust the process. So you're gonna get way ahead of those people who don't trust the process. And then two, you know that all right, the outcome isn't in my control. And you spend the most time in the process anyway. So it's important that you learn to get consistent in the process and knowing that there's no quick fix or a limitless pill that you can take. And it's just work. It's gonna take hard work. It's gonna take work at whatever it is you're doing. Even to get the mental skills right, it's gonna take work. And just knowing that is like, all right, I'm in this for a long haul. Like you said, it's a long game. And if you're willing to play the long game, then that is what's gonna separate you from the high performer, being a high performer versus not being a high performer. And too many people on this earth want, that quick fix. They want the easy way out. And even then you see it, like there's people who do a quick fix of something and then they'll revert back to their old ways just because they didn't build that habit of consistency or just build that foundation as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see this. I mean, this is a common one actually with a lot of the, people at the beginning, okay, of their poker careers. Let me just take that example. And a lot of them are young, single, and they basically say, right, okay, my plan is I'm going to work like crazy for 5 years, make the money, get to the top of the mountain, and then I'm kind of set. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't work that way. Um, you know, Number one, you will probably, so it's not even a lazy program, but in a way, they're not prepared to accept that it's a truly long-term game they're playing. And that in a way is another route to laziness in a way. They're just saying, I'm not prepared to wait 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And by the way, that wait hopefully won't be zero income. It will be making decent money. But what they really want is to have, the riches, the fame, the fortune in 5 years. And what they think is, it comes back to the marathon metaphor. They want to run the marathon by sprinting from the start line. They want to get that marathon finished in 15 minutes. And it's not, they just don't accept that while there's always the odd story, the outlier who's made it quickly, that's not the probability. And once you build that in your head that that's what you're going to do, it becomes a problem and you're not enjoying the process. Hopefully, this is the thing, you're wishing your life away in a sense. If it's all about I just want to get to that point, I don't know, the Olympics, right? The 4-year cycle, you have to, if you have no sense of enjoying and immersing yourself in the process, that's going to be damned hard. It's the same for these guys who say within 5 years, I'm going to have to have made a fortune in poker or in business. It's just not going to work out that way. You have to understand that sometimes getting to where you want takes a bit longer, and you might as well buckle up and enjoy what you're doing along the route. Otherwise, what you're really doing is making it a hell of a lot harder for yourself. So that mindset of understanding that this is a long-term process, and yeah, you're right. I think it comes from a confidence, by the way, in the process. Once you say, yeah, I'm going to stand on that start line and at the marathon, again, I'll use that metaphor. And I know I've run the marathon before. I've planned it. I've trained well for it. It is just me executing, and I'm going to get through that finish line. Hopefully, at or near my personal best, hopefully at or near the front of the field. That's great. And you can then trust yourself and you can maintain, great consistent form throughout that. I think there's a little bit of a mindset for the person who wants to race away of, I don't really believe in my process. I don't even really know what my process is. And so I don't trust myself. And I don't trust the process. I don't trust myself. I just want to get this over and done with. And that's not the mindset to get through anything. I mean, it's really interesting. You'll understand this as a professional athlete. I mean, what a big hero in this country, heroine, is Kelly Holmes. Great middle distance runner. And I remember when she won the Olympic gold at the 800, she ran it in more or less even pace the whole way around. And you'll know this better than me, but my understanding is if you that is a very physiologically efficient way to run your race, just being able to maintain that. But it takes a lot of self-belief because it looks like she's going faster and faster in the final straight, but in fact she's just maintaining the same pace. But
Right.
she just understood her process, believed in it, and followed it. And that takes a lot of training, a lot of preparation, and a great mindset, which doesn't come from nowhere. That is the mindset I think I would love to give to everybody as a coach, and I try to give to everybody as a coach, because that is what will get you to whatever your goal is, whatever your field.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just everything that you said makes so much sense. And I agree with that, even because as an 800-meter runner myself, I definitely do try to have ideally even splits and just making sure that I'm maintaining the speed that I have. And then also sometimes, I might find myself in a weird spot in the race, but just knowing and I try not to panic and say, all right, like, I still got this. There's still a chance for me to win. Let me make my make my moves correctly and then go from there. And then two, you talked a lot about the process and how people don't like it. And one thing I've learned is a quote, and it said, you spend a lot of time climbing the mountain than you do on its peak. And a lot of times, when you reach the mountaintop, you're gonna see another mountaintop and you're gonna have to climb that one. And so it's just important that we really embrace the process because we spend so much time within the process, right? And then you talked about, there's things that you want to instill into every athlete that you coach. So do you notice any mental struggles today that you didn't necessarily see in the past? Like, are there any new struggles today that you see that you haven't seen back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, definitely post COVID, anxiety seems to be more prevalent, generalized anxiety. Um, I think it's really important to make a distinction between generalized anxiety and performance anxiety. Those are often kind of merged into one, but they are two different things. And it's really important to distinguish the messaging around that because, coming back to the process, it's really interesting. I mean, again, I'm going to talk about a British athlete just because I suppose in this country we hear more about those guys. But Steve Redgrave, who won multiple Olympic golds at rowing, which, I got a rowing machine in one of my outbuildings here. God, it's hard. But like, and that guy is at the top level doing that year after year. I think he was like just about in his 40s when he competed in his last Olympics.
Oh, wow.
And I and he won, I think it was like 5 goals over 20-year span.
Sheesh.
And you think of the training that goes into that and the pain for that moment. And I remember him talking about the moment in the race when he was feeling pain, as inevitably you do, no matter how good you are. And he said, I love that moment because I knew that everybody else was feeling the pain and I coped with it better than them. So that's talk about embracing the process, embracing the pressure. That is again, that sort of resilient mindset comes back to something you said, by the way, about, you've been there in situations, and you were there. Was it a talk with a presentation you were doing with your classmates, and you get to the point where it's like, hey, I love this. I love that. I really love being in this situation because I've been there, done it. I can cope with it. I'm going to show my quality in this moment. And yeah, I've gone a bit off topic because you were asking me specifically what have I noticed more of. But yeah, the generalized anxiety, that all pervasive thing, which is kind of with people all day, which isn't healthy, is definitely there, as opposed to the specific performance related anxiety, which actually, we can talk about this if you're interested, can be actually leveraged for your benefit, which is a very different thing.
Yeah, no, I really like how you distinguish between the two because it's something I never thought about. I always just kind of lumped anxiety together, where it's like, all right, I'm feeling anxious because I'm about to perform, but then just generalized anxiety, even during COVID, right? For me personally, I knew like if I'm gonna be okay. So the quick backstory, I was injured and like right before COVID. And so for me, it was like, all right, this gives me time. My mindset was completely different. This is when I first started diving into like getting a better mindset and stuff like that. And when it first happened, when everything got shut down, it was just I'm just thinking to myself, okay, I have enough time to get back right. And while a lot of people are like, oh, I'm unmotivated, I don't feel like doing anything. For me, it's just like, all right, I'm gonna get back right. I'm gonna get back right. I'm gonna get back right. Cause I couldn't run pretty much the months leading up to COVID. And so now that I'm able to run, I'm just extremely grateful that I can run, regardless of, yeah, it's not an ideal situation, but I'm just happy to run. Like I'm just happy to run again. And so I think just having some of those mindset shifts and just knowing that okay, performance anxiety is always going to be there, but it's just a matter of how well can you manage it. And even
Yeah.
some of the generalized anxiety too, how can you manage that? A lot of people they feel anxiety and they just crumble under the pressure and it's like you don't always have to crumble every time you're feeling anxious about something. Sometimes you can lean into it and still act even in the midst of your anxiety. And the thing is, and what's so funny is that when you do perform, the anxiety goes away 90%, 95% of the time. I know for me, my heart could be beating super fast. When that gun goes off, I'm not anxious no more. I'm just in the zone, in my flow, trying to perform to the best of my ability. And so I think a lot of times anxiety can cripple people, but yet at the same time, going the thing that they're anxious of, just doing that thing is sometimes the key to them freeing them from that anxiety.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's obviously it's well known this idea, and it's very associated with professional sport of choking under pressure. There's a huge, probably one of the best studies, and I think it's a really good study, and there's been multiple iterations of it. Is free throws in the NBA and the women's NBA. Because of course a free throw is one of those beautiful controlled tests because it's effectively an action where nobody can interfere. It's you, the ball, the hoop, and your mind. And it's been found that in the final 20 seconds of a game where basically the outcome of the game is likely to depend on the outcome of the free throws, then the failure rate increases very statistically significantly. So there is real evidence that professional athletes will start to choke more under pressure, but there is an antidote to that, and this is something I work on clients with at a conscious level and a subconscious level. The conscious level work is this, that it's really important to understand. Probably a lot of mental game coaches and even just general coaches have for years used the idea of saying to the athlete, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. And that's not bullshit. It's actually, as it turns out, without probably a lot of people who've given that advice to reframe it that way, it turns out to be true. There's been tests done in recent years on flow states, and it's been found that in the opening seconds of flow states, there is autonomic arousal. In other words, that feeling we often feel of fear, a little bit of stress, a little bit of anxiety, that actually is a prelude, if you can channel it correctly, into a flow state. In other words, the highest performance state. In other words, what's happening there is this: your brain is recognizing this is important. And we want our brain to recognize this is important. We want to be, to put it in non-scientific terms, up for it. And that's something you can use positively. And there's some great work done by it's Dr. Alia Crum at Stanford University, and she took it was a great study, and she took two groups and she gave one of them a video which was lots of negative messaging around anxiety and stress, and then she took a second group and there was lots of positive messaging, and basically without going into her framework, and the framework which I teach clients, and then I actually reinforce it with subconscious work to make sure that the brain integrates it. But the framework she gave to the second group was your brain sending you a message that this is when you feel that little bit of stress and anxiety in pressure situations, your brain sending you a message, it's important. Now, be grateful for that, acknowledge it, welcome it, don't resist it, and use it now to direct your focus and be better. And basically, they did a number of tests on the two groups, and the group who had been given the positive messaging around stress and anxiety had much better cognition, so they were thinking more clearly, better mood. They even had, and they measured human growth hormone, and they actually had increased levels of human growth hormone.
Oh, wow.
So there was an actual positive physiological response to the positive framing of anxiety and stress. So this is why this is really important, because what it means is sometimes when we are in a pressure situation, we feel that little bit of tension, and it's almost like, oh, I can't feel like this. This is exactly how I don't want to feel. No, I've got to resist it. No, welcome it. Welcome it. This is fine. This is a different thing. And I think this is where the public health messaging, which is correct, chronic stress, that stress that people never kind of rid themselves of, if they suffer from it, that is something we want to change. And it's something, again, you can and should deal with, and it's something I deal with in certain clients. But that feeling of, okay, this is a big moment, I want to be ready for it, and I'm feeling a little bit nervous, stressful, even a little bit fearful, that is something that once you know how to do it, you can actually harness it in a positive way to actually enhance your performance. It can send you one of two ways. You come to a crossroads, and it can, as I say, there's evidence it can make you choke. But if you have the right input, there's evidence that you can actually turn it into a flow state more frequently. In other words, this comes back to the idea of hitting your A game much more often. So it's really important to understand that there are different dimensions to anxiety, and there is a kind of anxiety which we can call good anxiety, if you know how to utilize it.
Right. No, and I agree with that. And I think one thing that you mentioned about welcoming the anxiety, right? I know for me, one thing when I am feeling anxious on race day, one thing I always tell myself is I am feeling nervous. I admit that immediately. And knowing that is like, okay, I'm feeling nervous, but there's still an opportunity for me to still perform at a high level and kill it. And so it's just realizing that, okay, yes, the anxiety is there or the nerves are there, but at the same time, there's still an opportunity for me to just, kill it and do what I do best. And so just admitting that to myself and welcoming that anxiety, like you said, and welcoming those nerves, um, just lean into it. And I think sometimes when we resist it, then we might even perform worse because we're trying to resist it. Like, granted, yeah, you don't want to have like there's some people who might be extremely nervous and they might do things in a way, because I know some people, they'll like throw up before races and stuff like that because they're that nervous and stuff, and it's like, whoa. But sometimes just embracing that and just knowing that, okay, yeah, I feel this way, and still, you know I'm gonna perform in the midst of me feeling like this. That's really all it is. At the end of the even the highest of the highest performers, they still get nervous, they're still anxious. Athletes ask me all the time, do you get performance anxiety? Do you get nervous before your races? And my answer will always be yes. Regardless of whether you see me run a super fast time, I was always nervous before the race, but it's just a matter of how I deal with it and how I welcome it. And so to conclude and wrap up, what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone listening to this?
Well, you may say I'm biased, but I would say get performance coaching if you're in any high performance field, competitive field. I have to say, I wish there was such a thing at the beginning of my career. Maybe there was somebody out there. I have to tell you, it's long enough ago that the internet was not a thing. So finding that person would have been quite the challenge. I think a lot of people focus their efforts on becoming technically better. And what the technical work will do will get you to the ability to bring an A game, to bring an A game. But what people don't accept or understand is that part of high performance is being able to reproduce that time and time again. And that's not just technical work and technical knowledge. It's also about having the right performance and mindset foundations, which mean, you know, you can cope with the difficult moments. We've touched on some of the ideas of the challenging moments when things don't go well, that you can make sure that you do produce your best more often. That's what really is the hallmark of, you know, high performers. It's the ability to basically produce that A game more often. And that kind of coaching it makes a difference. It's something now, I mean, once I started, I never stopped. I have my own coaching once every 2 weeks. I see a performance coach. It doesn't matter how much I've learned, by the way, about all of this stuff. Somebody else is still going to see my weaknesses more clearly than I do. You can't read the label if you're inside the jar. And, you know, you know, and so I need that input. And yeah, sometimes the other person says, you know, my coach will say something to me and I'm like, yeah, that's right. Seems obvious now. But like, you don't always see it. And I've benefited hugely from it. And as I say, I'm not one for regrets, but, you know, again, if I could change one thing, I wish I'd had this, you know, 20 years ago. It would have made a heck of a difference, actually more like 30 these days. But yeah, that would be my advice. So you may call me a little biased in that, but I would say that would be one thing. Yeah, I think other than that, I would just say start with your vision. I would say to everybody, just clarify your vision. Vision is what's going to drive you through the difficult moments. We talked about consistency. It's a lot harder to be consistent if you're not really aligned with what you truly want to do. And again, this isn't just woo-woo generalized advice. Anybody in any doubts, read something like Angela Duckworth's Grit. She talks about the sense of purpose. Stephen Kotler's Art of the Impossible, about flow states. But the first thing he says is have a vision. Have a vision, because that will be what drives you through the difficult moments, which will, you know, be what they call the struggle phase of the flow cycle. That enables you to get into flow states and to get towards your goal. But if you're not really clear about what you want to do, then you're going to hit a roadblock somewhere. So I would start with that. That one's for free. The other one, I know, costs money. But I'd say both of those pieces of advice would have helped, or both those things would have helped me at an earlier stage for sure.
Wow, that was great pieces of advice. Not only did you give us one piece, but you gave us two. And I just want to say thank you so much for, you know, joining me on this podcast. I really do appreciate it. And, you know, I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon.
That's great. Well, really good. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here. Great chat.
Thank you.